To quickly introduce Abhay is the founder of Goodmylk and a really passionate animal rights advocate. He has made Forbes 30 under 30 Asia in 2019 and also Forbes 30 under 30 India in 2020, which is a phenomenal feat. At the same time, prior to Goodmylk, he started something called as SARV, a non-profit that did animal rights awareness campaigns. And Spurti has a decade worth of experience in food and beverage research and development. She was also at Rutgers University in the US, and at Goodmylk, she basically is the chief of R&D and leads the product conception, development, and commercialization for them. Before joining Goodmylk, Spurti has spent about 5 years at the Campbell Soup Company in the US, leading various R&D projects. And she has a bachelor's in engineering and biotechnology and a master's in food science at Rutgers University. Thank you so much, both of you. I'll open the presentation now for Abhay. So Abhay, if you start sharing the screen, it will be very useful for us.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, looks good.
All right. So we get started?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So when I was 16, I started a nonprofit called Society for Animal Rights and Veganism. That's what SAR stands for. And we did a bunch of animal rights activism campaigns across the country, about 2 every week in about 10 cities around India. I've been vegan for about 10 years now, and my motivation to be a vegan was ethics, of course. You know, animal agriculture as an industry is so large scale and so massive, and it hurts, you know, billions of animals every year. And that was my desire to be vegan and stop contributing to that cruelty. So while I was doing animal rights campaigns, a bunch of people would come up to me and say, "Hey, you know, it's nice to talk about veganism, but there are no products out there that are affordable to everybody." And that's when I started thinking about what products even existed as alternatives for people who wanted to be vegan. And you know, they were not accessible to everybody. They were really high priced, you know, around the 200-300 rupees per liter range. And you know, my mom and I, my entire family is vegan, so we started talking about what we could do to help this space and make plant-based food more accessible to everybody. And that was how Goodmylk as an idea came about. We were manufacturing at home for a while. My mom made these products, and I would deliver them on my bike all over Bangalore. And as we started getting more traction, we were able to build a formal structure around this idea. We never meant for it to be a company. The idea was that, you know, my original idea was that I would study engineering, get a job, and then run this on the side. But of course, it started demanding more and more of my attention and time. And we started building this as a real company and became ambitious about it. And it was at that key point where we started looking at how we could scale from manufacturing at home to an actual facility. We raised the seed round and started commercializing. So that's the start of Goodmylk. As a journey, you know, we started off with a peanut curd and almond milk because these were popular products that were already in the community. So when we started out, the sole goal was to make plant-based food affordable and accessible. Of course, we added something more to that, you know, when we started understanding the space better. But the goal was to find out popular products and make them cheap. And peanut curd was, of course, a common recipe found in the community, although nobody had commercialized it yet at that point. And almond milk was available commercially, but at a really high price. So we started out making refrigerated versions of these products at home and selling them. Soon we realized that for plant-based milks, especially, refrigerated supply chains are really challenging because they don't have as many barriers. And we started working towards making our milk shelf-stable, and we were able to move to a retort process for almond milk. And we also added a coconut milk soon after we started the almond milk. And you know, naturally, we're heading down the direction. We also decided to make the curd shelf-stable. Of course, that failed as an idea. We'll get more into that later. And we reverted back to refrigerated curd. It was around this time that we, and the lessons after failing from shelf-stable curd, did we realize that we wanted to add a very key component of functionality to our products. It's not just enough that plant-based taste, you know, plant-based is cheap and accessible, but it also must taste good and function like dairy. And that's when we started moving to combinations like cashew oat milks, and then soon after we launched a plant-based butter that melts, spreads, and all of that. And we launched a mayo, and we then moved from a retorted cashew oat milk to UHT cashew oat milk in a Tetra Pak. then we quite recently launched chocolate milk. So that's kind of been our journey with product development. All of these are very diverse. The milk isn't similar to how the curd is made, and none of these products are very similar in terms of the manufacturing. So it's been a journey for us in understanding, what the ecosystem can offer to us, and what we can leverage. These are our current products as they exist. With milk, a chocolate milk, a butter, a mayo, and our curd. We did eventually discontinue almond milk and coconut milk and all of the earlier products that you saw in my previous slide because they didn't live up to the promise of being functional and delicious like the way we wanted them to be. When we started commercializing from our home and started moving into a factory, the idea of raising a seed round became really prominent with us. The idea was that factories have large MOQs. It's not cheap to move into a factory. So we wanted to scale up there quickly. And of course, fundraising was a really key option that we were looking at back then. We were bootstrapped until then, and sometimes we took loans from family and friends, but we hadn't really formalized the fundraising process. We've fundraised twice so far. We did our first seed one in January 2018. We just closed our seed two in December 2019. These two processes are fundamentally different from each other, and I'm going to highlight that in the coming slides. So with our seed one, we didn't know many investors by name. All of this was we had to reach out to them separately on the forms on their website, and a lot of funds like warm intros in India. So we weren't able to make much headway with that. So we started looking at incubators and accelerators. They have lower asks. A lot of incubators are free. They don't even ask anything of your company. And I got into one such incubator at my college where we really started understanding what it meant to formalize structure as a company. We actually started a first website after going through this incubator because we were until then taking orders on WhatsApp. And then I got into a university innovation fellowship at Stanford University, and they taught us a little bit about design thinking, lean startup, and it really helped us understand how to iterate product rapidly. For a company to go through so many product changes in a span of 2 years is not easy, but we learned how to do that better by understanding the process of lean startup and how to pivot and what to pivot into and how to validate our hypotheses. That's what incubators and accelerators did for us. After the fellowship, I also did a semester incubator at Boulder, and it was really beneficial for me in terms of understanding what even exists out there. Boulder is sort of the mecca of the natural product industry in the United States. And I connected with a lot of really cool entrepreneurs who are big names in the plant-based space and learned firsthand from them what their journey was. But not much of this got us close to fundraising. All of these were great. We could learn more about the ecosystem. Of course, Good Food Institute was great. At that time, they didn't have an India chapter, but we were in touch with their global chapter, and we had a lot of one-on-ones with their core team and understood how to fundraise, but we weren't any closer to getting actual leads to fundraise from. So we started looking at a place that was really comfortable for us, community. We are active members of the community. We are activists. I was an activist for a really long time, and it sort of formalized into this way where I reached out to a bunch of people and said, "Hey, do you know anybody that we could fundraise from?" And a friend of a friend of a friend eventually ended up leading our first round. And so community was such a key part of what we wanted to do back then. And it really helped us close our deal. And of course, understanding deal terms, a lot of that came with conversations with Varun. He told me, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And we tried to close the deal on as friendly terms as possible. It's not just enough that you raise money, but it must come on the right terms and conditions. Otherwise, you may lose the upside you have, or you may have to deal with a difficult investor. Thankfully, we haven't yet come across that situation, so we're grateful in that sense. But deal terms are as important as the fundraise capital itself. Our C2 was a little different. We already had a list of investors that we wanted to reach out to. So they weren't new investors that we added just because they said they wanted to invest, but we had a list and we just went after that list. Thankfully, 2 or 3 members of this list were already in touch. So the difference between our C1 and C2 was that our investors in C2, most of them we were already in touch with for a year by the time we had fundraised. So they were our mentors. They really helped us fundraise. They really helped us build the company before they injected capital into it. So the outreach part was minimal, but a lot of people, a lot of investors reached out to us after the Forbes 30 under 30 list became public. So that was great. And we found a few vegan investors. Again, all our investors from seed to as well, highly mission aligned with the company. That was because we knew who we wanted to reach out to, and they reached out to us organically because they followed the right communities. And in our C2, the other key difference was that there was a lot of diligence work in both ways. We didn't want to get just every other investor on board. We did our homework on them. They did our homework on us with respect to our financials, our fundamentals, to see if we were legally and financially a good company to invest in. And again, then were deal terms and closing on favorable conditions. This took longer than our seed one, but that's also because there were many moving parts. We had to deal with 4 or 5 investors and versus 1 investor in our seed one. So eventually it took longer to close, but we were able to arrive at the right terms and conditions for us to close as well. So of course, happy to answer more questions on this later. So coming to one of our flagship products, this product's been with us from day one, and that's our curd. It's gone through so many iterations, and I'm excited to share that story with you. So we started out making it in our kitchen at home. We were already making it for ourselves as a family, so it wasn't that hard to scale it up from making 2 liters to making 6 liters. We had to tweak the recipe a little bit in order to scale it up in that small extent. But by and large, we had the recipe with us already because we were using it for ourselves. And the goal was to make it affordable. We had no focus on functionality, nor did we market the product that way. So when we sold the product, it was just that it's affordable and here's the price and here's peanut curd for you. There was no mention about probiotic benefits or structure or whatever that comes with what people expect of curd. We focused on none of that. That was the realization that we got much later on. But the cool thing about starting so small for us is that we were able to sell products from day one. It was so crucial for us to get feedback from our customers from day one, and not just customers who might be potentially paying us, but people who actually paid us and then gave us feedback on top of that. I believe a key part of why that was easy for us was because we were already engaged with the community and we built quite a bit of trust there. And that may not be so easy for brands that are breaking into this space. So being actively engaged in the community is such a big part of understanding what the pain points are. So we didn't wait for a future date for consumers to give us feedback. They paid us when our product was bad, and they paid us until our product was good, and then they kept paying us. And that's so important because you want people who experience the pain of having a bad product and the pleasure of having a good product. And that is not always the case when you don't have a product and you're just hypothetically asking people, what would you do if I launch this? The best way to do is to launch a small version of it and see what happens. The key takeaways product validate from this journey for us was validate our product as early as possible, hopefully with paying customers. And we've always done that for every single product that we've had. And it's been working well so far for us. Over to Spurti for the next slide.
Hi, everyone. So I think getting into phase 2, which was scale up, because we just got the seed round in, we had some capital to play around with. So that's when Abhay, his mom, and there was another operations manager at that point, they really went, full force into actually scaling this product up. So the first step of that was actually scouting for your contract manufacturers. Especially in India, plant-based dairy is very, very nascent, right? There's nobody actually making products like this. And even for companies that are making this, it's potentially in-house. So the team did a thorough job. They were able to find a valuable partner. And a key point here was to establish business case with the co-man, because you need to show them that there is potential for this product to grow, and that's not easy. And as you heard from Abhay before, he's an extremely persuasive and sharp guy. So I think he does a really good job at that. And since this isn't a normal process, it also involved us buying a lot of equipment. So we couldn't really go into a contract manufacturing facility, set up the process and just go running. We actually had to pay for equipment in order to achieve the product attributes that we wanted to. So we went ahead with that. And one key difference here is that Abhay and his mom in phase 1 had validated the product as a refrigerated peanut curd. But here we actually took it in a slightly different direction, and we decided to launch it as a shelf-stable curd. Now you must be wondering why shelf-stable, right? Because you don't really find a lot of shelf-stable dahi at all. Next slide, Abhay. Yeah, so there were 3 main reasons we decided to do that as a company. The first was ease of manufacturing. As I mentioned, in order for us to set up a facility to actually do this is very, very capital intensive. However, India is rich with a lot of contract manufacturers who are great when it comes to thermal processes. So it's easy for us to actually partner with them. And also the minimum order quantities required is much lesser. As a young startup, our sales are not close to any of the larger companies or even what dairy is. So we need to make sure that once we manufacture this product, we have enough time for us to actually sell this. So from an inventory perspective and an MOQ perspective, it's great. The second is supply chain benefits. You know, as we all know, cold chain in India is in the process of getting better, but it's not highly evolved. So for us to actually avoid this complexity made a lot more sense as a smaller company. And the last is we assumed that there was a consumer benefit. And we thought that consumers would love to keep a curd on shelf for maybe 6 months and pick it up as and when they wanted. However, we were wrong about quite a few of these assumptions. And it didn't work because primarily it had a subpar sensory experience. So what does that mean, right? It didn't really taste like dahi. You couldn't scoop it like dahi. It didn't have like that fresh quality and tartness that you needed. And another important reason why people are consuming dahi today is for the probiotic benefits. And by actually thermally treating this product to make it shelf stable, it had no probiotic benefits. So some of the key takeaways from this phase, which is phase 2 as we call it when it comes to curd, is that number one, make sure that you evaluate every capital expense thoroughly. As a young company with folks that probably didn't have a lot of experience in this space, you reach out to a contract manufacturer, you think that they know much more than you, and you run with their advice. And that's what happened to us when it came to investing in equipment. However, there are quite a few things that we could have done differently. So our learning is we should have spoken to more people. We should have done a lot more DD around it in order to make sure that we were really confident about each capital expense, which is a fixed expense for a company, to pay off. The second is that consumer is king. We decided to do shelf-stable products because it made sense for us as a company. It was easier for us. It was less complex for us. However, that's not what the consumer wanted. So ultimately, as a food and beverage product company, you have to think in the lens of a consumer. Once you can give them a great tasting product at a good price and conveniently, then you can actually look at optimizing your business in different ways. The third was to be laser focused on the problem that you're trying to solve for. So what Abhay and his mom did very uniquely and fantastically is to validate the product from day one by actually getting consumers to pay for it. However, when it came to phase 2, we took that validation and we completely changed it into launching a shelf-stable product, right? So it really didn't stick with the hypothesis that we had. So to be laser focused that this is the problem we want to solve. We want to have a great dairy alternative which tastes as close to dahi as possible. We don't want to solve all the other problems that seem important in certain ways. And the last, which we have only realized in hindsight, is to fail cheap, fast, and often. Yes, we made quite a few capital expenses. However, in the grand scheme of things, they're still manageable, and we're able to leverage some of that, those pieces of equipment in different facilities today. And we were able to pivot very quickly. As you saw in the timeline earlier, it was around Jan 2018 that the company launched a shelf-stable yogurt. And before July, we had a refrigerated product on the shelf. And that was very important for us to do. So going into the next phase, which is phase 3, is we finally started getting closer to what we wanted, which was a dairy like dahi. So what we did is actually ensure that we kept our R&D expenses very, very lean. And what I mean by that is we used our home kitchens in order to formulate the recipe, to develop the process. We invested in small pieces of equipment, but that's about it. We didn't go crazy with it. The second was, now that we had a new co-man to deal with, and we already had one product failure, we had to establish trust with him. We really had to show him that, you know, this isn't just a fad. We strongly believe in plant-based dairy, and we have the potential in order to grow this category significantly, even in a country like India. And the way in which we did that was to actually do well-paid and well-compensated pilot plant trials. So typically when you reach out to a contract manufacturer, they will have you pay a very small amount just to validate the product before you go into manufacturing. However, we recognize that this is a huge risk for our co-man as well. And it's in a category that he or she is not familiar with. So we do well-compensated pilot runs, so it builds confidence on both parties. And then we actually sell that product. So the manufacturer is also able to see that there is a market for this and we can garner the sales required to keep the business running. And that's been very, very important. The next step is you have a great product, you have a process that works, but that's just not enough to get a product on shelf. You need nutritional testing done, you need microbiological testing done, you need to make sure that your shelf life testing is completed. And although these seem very, very daunting, what I will tell a lot of entrepreneurs out here is that there are many ways for you to do it pretty easily, and that's by outsourcing and delegating. For us as a company at Goodmylk, we didn't want to be analytical experts to house this inside. We were more than willing to give this out to labs, and there are plenty of them that do a very, very good job because it's common to the food and beverage industry. It isn't unique to our product itself. So we've really seen where it makes sense to delegate and where it makes sense for us to in-house certain attributes. And lastly, the reason why we did shelf-stable yogurt was because we wanted to ease the supply chain. However, we realized that to put a good quality product on the shelf and to make sure that consumers want to keep consuming this product, we have to solve for that cold chain. So the team has done a fantastic job in actually building a cold chain in Bangalore, specifically ground up, where we have a milkman-like delivery service where the products reach your doorstep before you even get up, probably before 8 a.m. in the morning in most cases. So this took a lot of work. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a problem we wanted to solve as a company. However, in order to service our consumers and our customers best, this is what we had to do. So some of the key takeaways for us from this phase 3 was localization. So along this phase of transition where we went from shelf-stable curd in order to the refrigerated curd, we tried quite a few varieties in terms of consistencies and flavor profiles and different levels of acidity and sweetness, etc. And what we've realized is, especially in India, you have to localize. Globally, yogurt does very, very well, but the way Indians consume dahi is very, very different. So we made sure that we could actually build in all those sensory attributes. So irrespective of any category that you're looking into, make sure that you have the local consumer lens on when you're solving for that problem. The second is that taste is non-negotiable. Once we got to this, and that's a pretty common statement that you hear from most food and beverage companies, and it's actually very, very true, and it's not something for anyone to take lightly. And what I mean by that is, you can actually have an affordable product, you can have it work great, but if it doesn't taste good, there's no way that the consumer will come and have any sort of repeat buy from you. The third is to really keep our research and development as lean, creative, and nimble as possible. And what that means is that, we used a home kitchen. We could have easily gone, rented a space, put some more equipment in there, but it really didn't make sense for us to direct our resources there. Second is to be creative. The way we actually make our dahi, the process that is used for it is pretty interesting. It's very different. And we've thought out of the box to make it happen in order to ensure that we really don't raise our manufacturing costs either. And the third is to be nimble. So by actually working with co-mans, by not having a fixed rental space, we're able to change direction very easily as a company. So now we move on to the last phase, which really has led to the product that you currently see on shelves. And that is almost like Dairy Dahi and just like Dairy Dahi actually. The first important step here to think of is actually managing your contract manufacturer. We were able to go get someone on board, but now long term, you have to keep investing in that relationship. And we look at it more as an investment versus a transaction, right? We have to keep showing them that there's growth. We have to keep showing them that we're invested in making the process more efficient for them. So it's a two-way street, and it requires a lot of energy and time on your part, but trust me, it's completely worth it. The second is to actually maintain consistent product quality. Just because you have a really good recipe and you have a process that's set in stone, that's not good enough. You have to make sure that you can make the same quality product every single day. And that takes quite a bit of work, which I think a lot of us underestimate. So you need to have very tight SOPs in place. You need to make sure that you know exactly what quantitative parameters you're testing for, whether that be pH or Brix, etc., and monitor that data and continue to change your process so that deviation for these metrics is as minimal as possible. And over the course of this year where the refrigerated product has been on shelf, we've had a whole host of issues ranging from raw material issues to processing issues. So the point that I really want to make here is that it's not just about launching the product. R&D is continuous for any product that you have. So don't really think about it as something that you have done wrong. It's just the nature of the process. So continue to iterate, continue to make sure that you can keep delivering high quality products. And the last very, very important change that we made recently, which we've received some fantastic feedback on, is a packaging change. So initially in phase 3, we actually went with what the co-man had capabilities for, which was a paper tub or a gable top. And it also made sense from a sustainability standpoint for us. So it did check off quite a few boxes. However, when we actually started looking at how consumers are using it, and now that we started transitioning to retail shelves, where it was not just direct business to consumer delivery, we were delivering it to the namdaris, we were delivering it to the nature's basket. There were quite a few issues when it came to handling the package. So some of our key insights from this phase, which is phase 4, are, Abhay, can we go to the next slide? Is to invest in partnerships, whether it is ingredient suppliers, whether it's in co-man. We built a lovely community, and I'm very, very thankful to many of you who are right there listening to our webinar right now for really taking the time and energy to support a business that seems very small today. But trust me, we're working really hard to make sure that it's as big as possible in India. The second is, from an R&D standpoint, get really scientific and as detail oriented as you can. So understand your raw materials. For us, peanuts are a very, very important part of our curd, and very, very, even a supplier change can have a huge impact in the quality of the curd that we produce. So you really have to understand what are the parameters that are important about this raw material and get detail oriented by things like this. Lastly is, don't underestimate the importance of both quality as well as functional packaging. And as you can see on the next slide, where we have some product testimonials. Yeah, you can see that, we've received really good feedback on the product when it comes to our peanut curd from day one, as soon as we launched the refrigerated versions. But there were consumers who were telling us the packaging isn't functional. They can't close it after they've used some amount of the curd. So we listened and we implemented this new packaging change, which has been received very, very well. So I would say through this case study, which of Goodmylk's standard, as well as one of our best star products, which is the curd, there are lots of small learnings that we've absorbed over the course of the last 2 years almost. And these are some of them that we wanted to share with you. So I think I'll let Abhay take over for the next slides, where he really talks about Goodmylk as an organization and not just a startup.
Right. So a big need for us was to transition from an idea into being a formal company. I think that's a really hard part for any startup is, when you work with your closest first few set of people, they become really close to you, not from just a professional perspective, but from a personal perspective as well. And really figuring out how to get all of these people to collaborate together and cooperate together to create something great. That was an entirely different skill set that we had to develop as a company, which is how to build like an organization and not just a group of smart people. Sorry, hold on. Yes. So we have always been purpose driven, and that's the core part. That's the core reason why we get up in the morning and do what we do. It isn't enough that we are purpose driven and only impact 10. It must reach as large a scale as possible, and comes in the idea of building an organization that can scale to 100, 200,000, whatever number of people, and really be functioning efficiently across the board. And the first thing that we're committed to doing is really hiring the best people. Spurti is a great example of that. And what we try to do is look at people who aren't just great resources to understand food technology or finance or marketing, etc., but really figure out. There's a popular term called product market fit, and there's another term that's called founder product market fit, which is to figure out why are you the best person in this market to start this company, and that translates to employees as well. I don't have a term for it, but it really is, how is the person that you're getting on board the best qualified out of the entire universe of candidates available, not just the best that work for you in terms of your parameters, but in terms of how can they function today, how can they scale tomorrow, how can they build the organization out, manage thousands of people, work across domains, and really have an expertise in one, but really be able to solve most of the problems that come up. Everybody in our team today are very cross-functional. We all know what's going on. We all talk to each other. We help solve each other's problems. And there's no stick to your lane type of mentality that we have. We encourage people to look beyond their domains and solve problems. And that comes with hiring really smart, really determined people, but also simply the best because they can solve problems and they can foresee problems that no one else can see as easily. The other thing we're doing well today is to be completely transparent about all our numbers. Everybody knows how much revenue in the organization. Everybody knows how much revenue we're making. Everybody knows how much money is in the bank for us. Everybody, whatever obscure number you want, even if you don't need to know it, we will tell it to you so that you completely feel the ownership of the entire organization and really know exactly what is going on. You don't have to worry about, oh my God, is the cash running out, or am I going to have a job day after tomorrow? We just want everybody to be fully aware of all the challenges and everything that's in the company. So we're quite bullish about that. And the other thing we do is make sure that people who join us are already engaged members of the community. They have a voice outside of the company. They are active members of the community. They feel the same pain that the rest of the community does, and they're engaged in making the world a better place outside of the company as well. And that makes for a very highly engaged team within the organization. Spurti, do you want to take this up?
Yeah, sure. So I think now that it's been a good 2 years where we've spent a lot of time launching a lot of different products, we're really crystal clear about what our R&D development, our R&D strategy is. If you asked me this question, let's say a year ago, I probably would not be able to tell you in such a focused manner, but I think we've done the work and I would like to actually share it with the group here. And for us, our benchmark product is dairy, right? We don't really care about an alternative milk that comes out. We are not worried about the soy milks or the almond milks. For us, what we want to do is we want to be as close to dairy as possible in terms of nutrition, in terms of sensory, in terms of its application. What I mean by that is nutritionally, it should be comparative, and I will show you an example of that. Sensory wise, so your taste, your aroma, your texture should be as close to dairy as possible. Obviously, there are challenges with it, and that's what we're working through. And application. So if you take milk, for example, we want our milk to work in a cake. We want our milk to work in a sauce. We want our milk to work in your chai. That's the direction towards which we're headed. And what it means for us to accomplish this is that we have to be agnostic to the ingredient. Today, we have a peanut curd. Tomorrow, it could be made of a completely different raw material if that means that our curd is much closer to the dairy curd. So we're thinking about this very, very differently. We're also technology agnostic, whether it's using UHT, whether it's using pasteurization, whether it's using retort or a new technology that's out there. We really don't care as long as it gets the product as close to dairy as possible. And lastly, we have decided that we're going to be highly function driven. As Abhay mentioned, the start of the company was not based on functionality. It was based on affordability, accessibility, and it really made sense then. But now that we've had insights from consumers, we know that function plays a huge role, especially in India when it comes to dairy. So I'm going to share a couple things about our product in order for you to get a better idea about this. So Abhay, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So if you look at our peanut curd, for example, our ingredients are peanuts, water, and culture. Typically, what is Dairy Dahi made of? It's made up of milk and culture. So we wanted to be as close to it in terms of ingredient statement as possible. And also, there was a very specific reason why peanut works very well. I think Abhay's mom intuitively, as a good chef, was able to develop a recipe that has great sensory attributes. But when I think about it from a technical standpoint, it has the right protein profile. It has the right fat profile for us to be able to get the texture that we need that's so critical to dahi. And this little chart here, basically, we've spread out the visual, the aroma, the taste, and the texture attributes that we would like to get to, because that's how Dairy Dahi is described. And I would say visually, we are there. Texture-wise, we are there. Aroma and taste, when it comes to that, we have the sourness that's required. We have the creaminess that's required. However, what we're missing is actually that milky sweetness. So that's something that we're actually working on in order to make our curd even better. And when we look at it in terms of nutrition, as I mentioned, we don't want to just be close to dairy in terms of either sensory attributes or in terms of application. We want it to be nutritionally comparative. So if you look at that table, you will see that in terms of protein, in terms of, Abhay, next slide, yeah. In terms of protein, in terms of fats, in terms of carbohydrates, we're very, very close to what the average is for some of the other curd brands that are out there on the market. Yes, in terms of fat, we're slightly higher. However, based on our consumer feedback, people really enjoy that rich and that indulgent texture that they get with our curd. So I think, with all this information and all this clarity that we've gleaned over the last 2 years, our future to us is very, very clear. And we can define that just using 3 statements. Abhay, yeah. So for us, we want our products to be as ubiquitous as dairy. So any place you're able to buy a dairy product today, we want Goodmylk to be present there with that product. That means accessibility. It means multiple touch points. We want to be as functional as dairy. So it should work exactly like how you're using dairy today. And lastly, but very, very importantly, I think Abhay has made sure that this has sort of been an important proposition from the start. But however, we want to spell it out that we want to be as affordable as dairy. And that really does not mean we want to be cheap, but we want to make sure that we provide as much value to the consumer as we can for the price point that they pay. And with that, we'd like to wrap up this presentation. And I think I'll pass it on to Abhay and Sharda for questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abhay and Spurti. I think it was a great presentation covering a lot of points that our audience usually has questions about. Just so you know, everybody attending today, we have some of the questions in. Now would be a good time to put in some of your questions as well. But obviously through the registration form, we have received a lot of questions and we have tried to derive some themes emerging out of it so that most of the points get covered in the Q&A session. So let's just start with the Q&A part of the webinar today. And firstly, I think we have covered a lot of ground on new product development, what it really takes to build a company in the context of India, Oman, etc., etc. So I tried to probe a little deeper in some of the questions that were asked today, and also kind of add to that context from what we've been receiving in the past few minutes. So can we, one question that people usually have is about the segment of your market, right? Like a lot of the questions are around veganism, for example. Like you talked a lot about community being a vegan entrepreneur at start, and then you explained us how you shifted to being more functional in nature. So can you tell us a little bit about your customers in general, like the percentage segment? Are they vegan, non-vegan, flexitarian, etc.?
That's been an interesting study for us as well. When we started out, all of our customers were our friends. We knew them very actively within the community. But as we grew, more and more of our customers started being strangers. And when we did surveys, we found out that less than 30% of our customers are vegan. That's also sort of understanding that increasingly more customers weren't vegan sort of led us to the understanding that we need to make products more functional as well, because they're using your product to solve very different problems than the vegan is using it for. And eventually, the common point that everybody's going to use plant-based dairy for is to replace dairy. So that was, it sort of interestingly coincided with that learning. But less than 30% of our customers are vegan. A few of our customers are not vegetarian either. Quite a few of them have dairy intolerances. Some of them are just trying to cut down on their consumption of animal products, but they don't identify as vegetarian or vegan. I think increasingly the expectation also is that when we grow, less and less of our customers as a percentage will be vegan. And hopefully at some point, the vegans aren't our target audience in that sense, because it's kind of like preaching to the choir. They're already vegan, and the impact goals to the company are better met when you go after people who aren't vegan and then get them to consume more and more plant-based food. So that's our goal and our expectation as well.
Makes sense. That's great. And by the way, we also have Varun Deshpande, who's the Managing Director for the Good Food Institute India, and Siddharth Bede, who's a Science and Technology Specialist focusing on plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, today with me on the panel. So Varun, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah, Shardul, that I think you knew I would have wanted to come in there and say that makes me super happy, Abhay, to hear you say that, because I mean, in terms of the impact goals of our entire sector, it makes so much sense to grow out beyond the vegan community and try and supply to as many people as possible. It's a good forcing function on your company to be able to satisfy people that have very stringent requirements for how milk should behave and how curd should behave and things like that. So compare your company to Tesla, for example. Tesla's fantastic. Elon Musk has achieved something amazing when they're able to get early adopters to put down deposits before a car has even touched a production line. That's fantastic. But for their overall goals of converting the entire automobile industry to electric, it makes a ton of sense to be able to satisfy people who are not early adopters also. So that's really great. That's basically what I wanted to say, Shardul. I mean, the segment that's driving the adoption of alternative proteins globally is not veganism, because people who are self-avowed vegans are actually a small percentage of the population, right? So it's what Abhay described, which is people who are trying to cut down their consumption of animal products for various reasons. They could be health, they could be environment, they could be just because it's tasty and it happens to be available. So that's the thing that I think is driving growth in the alternative protein sector, even in India. That's fantastic.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think, Abhay, there are a lot of questions about the early part of, starting Goodmylk around how did you, like you mentioned the point about selling from day one, right? And some questions are around the community some community connections that you've built around selling. How did that help in the process of getting the product out, getting those early numbers and revenues in? Can you talk a little bit about that and what pivots you made in the initial 2 days to make sure that you're selling at the same time, like improving your product quality alongside?
Sure. I think community trust helped a long way in terms of building some sort of reputation, right? So when you're fundraising, people want to know who you are, and usually a lot of people who are much older, they work in Microsoft, IBM, whatever it is, and they start tech companies, and maybe a parallel is they work for Pepsi and they start food companies, right? But with me, I had no professional background as such. I actually dropped out of college in my second year, so I don't have much of an academic background either. But what really contributed to building trust in the building that track record was that we had a lot of community backing us from our start days. And if an investor wanted to do the diligence on who we were, that I would just not run away with the money, then they could just go online, look up all these press releases, look up at the look up social media, and just see that I was already part of an engaged community, and that tends to build trust. And also with our early when you launch a product, people need to understand that you're in it for more than just the money. And I think having that activism background really already helped establish that for us, and that's why they were okay with taking that early risk on us. And actually, a lot of what I'm grateful for is that even if we had a shelf-stable curd that was by our own admission a really bad product, we still had paying customers for it. And of course, they said we would like for you to improve this, but they never stopped paying us. And that trust does not come easy. And I think it came from understanding that we were setting out to solve a really large problem, and we were very, very mission driven. And I think that's where community played a role, because they really stood by us in our darkest of times. That's just I'm really grateful to the community, really. Yeah.
So Siddharth, I know you have a couple of sci-tech oriented questions for Spurti as well. Would you like to jump in and cover those?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Shardul. And thank you, Abhay. Thank you, Spurti. Wonderful presentation and talking about your journey in creating Goodmylk. I think a couple of questions which are coming in on a common theme is that, India has a lot of indigenous crops, say millets and pulses. So, in terms of using these crops for plant-based dairy, how would our R&D process look like? And, does Goodmylk have any plans of incorporating these crops into its food products too? Spurti, I think you're on mute. We aren't able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I said I was really happy to hear this question, that people are looking at indigenous local grains because they have a huge potential, right? Like oat has taken over the world today, and it comes mainly from Sweden and New Zealand, actually. It's not an indigenous crop to India even. But, we see immense potential, but it doesn't mean that it can happen overnight. There's a lot of R&D work that needs to be done. We really need to be able to characterize the different functionalities that these grains, whether it's ragi or whether it's foxtail millet or whether it's horse gram, any of these ingredients, we need to understand them better. So if you ask me if there's potential, 100% yes. But I also think as a community, both in academia as well as with academic and private partnerships, there's a lot of work for us to be done to actually be able to implement it. And from a process standpoint, it's really hard for me to comment on it right now because there are multiple ways in which you can put a product together. It just takes a little bit of creativity. It depends on the problem that we have at hand.
Perfect. Thank you. And then Spurti, just zooming in a little bit on the R&D aspect and characterization aspect, right? So what does that really entail? Because we have, our community over here on this call, and we have a lot of stakeholders like, professors from academic institutes to R&D tech consultants. How can, everyone really contribute in getting these supply chains up and running, which would contribute to, say, India's food and nutrition security too?
To be honest, Siddharth, I'm also learning. I'm no expert in this. So if there are any scientists and professors out there, I'm sure you have a lot more experience. But in my opinion, I think we really need to understand what are the attributes of milk that are important, the functionality that we keep emphasizing on, right? Whether that's emulsification capacity, whether it is being able to function as a binder, whatever it is, we need to extract that and understand what are the components present in each of the grains, whether that means their protein composition, their carbohydrate composition, the kind of sugars that they have, for example, or what is their protein amino acid profile, what is their fatty acid composition, and how can we actually mix and match a lot of these to get that ideal state that we're looking for. So I think, I'm not an expert in this. I haven't delved that deep into it, but there are some interesting ways to do it. And I would also actually leverage a lot of literature and information that's already present in journals. That's how I go about my work. There's a ton of information that you can get just off of Google Scholar. So get deep, understand those raw materials, and really start playing around.
Perfect. Thank
It's
you.
a very important point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
sorry, guys. Just to jump in there to highlight two specific projects. Well, first at the outset to highlight that mindset that Spurti has and that Goodmylk has internally, because Spurti is heading R&D of iteration and then working backwards from an end product and then being able to really find the information you need out there in the scientific literature. All of those things are super important. So if you're trying to get involved in the sector, it's extremely important to understand that whether you're formulating plant-based meats, egg, dairy applications, even ingredients that go into the sector, even doing basic research on millets or pulses or any of these indigenous crops, it's extremely important to have technical competence inside your firm. That's just one of the things that is a constraint overall in our sector, and it's important to remember that you have to try and access it to whatever extent necessary. We're trying to work on that, of course, but it's going to take time to build up. The second thing that I wanted to say was there are a couple of really interesting projects that you may want to check out. The first I sent out in our newsletter yesterday, and if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, please email us. It goes out to about 650 people. And is just full of information that might be relevant to you. The Wageningen University Food and Bio-Based Research Group in the Netherlands has an open call for partnership in research in various areas that include plant-based meats and others, which involve doing the kind of research that Spurti is describing. They're looking for paid partners so that they can pool the money and do research, and then you can take the results of that research and use it for your application. So that's something to note. And if you want more information about that, we're actively working with them to get more partners in India to participate in that. So you can reach out to us for that. The second project, really quickly, is I mentioned this on our call with Makkan last week. We have a project actively running, which Siddharth is leading, which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which looks at some of these properties of 3 varieties of millets. And we'll have more scientific information emerging about that over the next year or so, but we're doing essentially the same type of research that Spurti described, putting it out open access. So foaming, emulsification, gelling, water holding capacity, protein dispersibility index, if any of these things mean anything to you, we're trying to put out a lot of open access information on pearl millet, finger millet, and sorghum. So, reach out to us if you have any questions about this kind of work or if you'd like to work together on any of this stuff. Thanks.
I think right there, I just want to do a shout out to Varun, Shardul, Siddharth, and the entire team, because as a startup, our resources are constrained. We have only so much time. We have only so much depth that we can achieve in a lot of products. So I'm really grateful that you guys are taking on this kind of work.
Thank you, Spurti. And I'm sure that like entrepreneurs like you who commercialize a lot of this research, which is being done in labs and with technical consultants, is actually the validation of that research. So I mean, both sides. I mean, that's the point I was actually going to make. A lot of entrepreneurs that contact us are trying to figure out how to go on about building this technology stack, right? And at the same time, there are a lot of other stakeholders in our community who are trying to offer the similar stack. Like talking about indigenous crops and sources of protein for dairy. I remember, I'm from Nifty, I'm a food scientist. There were students who were working on these areas like milk from hemp, etc., etc. And there are usually professors in many different food universities who have that expertise in-house. Sometimes, obviously, there are technical consultants who've made a career out of doing the same thing. So just connecting with the right people to get started, and definitely stressing on Varun's point, having somebody who with a food science and technology background in-house is a must for any kind of innovation in this plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy sector. So on that note, Abhay, actually, your first phase was without a food scientist, right? You developed your product at your home kitchen. You kind of tried to do a lot of iteration in-house with the GFI team through your lot of primary literature. So can you elaborate a little bit about what difference having Spurti, who is a food scientist, has made into your entire journey?
And how things are all the difference, really. Yeah, it just makes all the difference. I just don't have the technical understanding of how to make it. Of course, at Spurti, I've learned a lot, so I'm able to speak some of that language more now. But the product was nearly not as close as what we thought it would be. And if you don't have that skill set, you're going to hit a plateau where your product just doesn't get better, no matter how many rupees you throw at it. And eventually, having that technical expertise is great. And with something, with Spurti, I think something really cool about her is she's able to really move across categories without having any issues with sort of understanding the science of it. So, you want to talk plant-based milk to her, plant-based ice creams, plant-based meat, plant-based cheese, plant-based curd, whatever you want to talk to her about. She's able to develop a deep technical understanding for it. And I think, having that sort of Swiss Army knife type of understanding of the fundamentals and the first principles of the science that goes into it has gone a tremendous way in achieving product market fit for us. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to scale beyond 50,000-60,000 rupees per month in revenue. We only started seeing large growths in revenue when Spurti got the product to be where it was. So absolutely big difference.
Makes sense. Great answer. And I think the point you make around Swiss Army knife approach, I think that's very valuable. When an entrepreneur is starting out with a small core team, it's very important. And you stress upon hiring well, paying them well, your core team. And at the same time, having people who are generalists at the same time specialists in certain things, right? So there are a lot of questions around how to go on about dealing with the co-manufacturer or finding right ingredient sources in India, how to have those discussions around what specific cultures might go into making curd, etc., etc. And some of the questions are here, like how do we make specific things with peanut curd, etc. I think a lot of it is obviously your personal IP, and that is developed only when you hire somebody internally to do a lot of that research. So completely makes sense. And I think next question I had as a follow-up on this was numbers that you mentioned, right? Can you talk a little bit about what efforts are currently underway to bring parity between the cost of your plant-based milk products or plant-based dairy products compared to conventional products that are available in the market?
Sure. So Tetra Pak milks, they're around the range of 70 to 80 rupees per liter. Of course, trying to compete with the more government subsidized cooperative brands may be harder at this point. But I think the initial benchmark is for us, it was, let's try to achieve the price of organic milk. Then let's try to achieve the price of, then we try to achieve the price of milk by private dairy companies. And that currently is around the 70-80 range. And then, we can see what we can do beyond that. Currently, sorry, I'm doing a bit of background noise.
Which is fine. Maybe you can, I think something's on the street, but it's okay. Please go on.
Right, yeah. So, we're currently at the price range of 120, of course, as our max. We sell it for a much cheaper price if you buy subscriptions with the company. So it's around 100 to 120. So we have a way to go in terms of dropping that cost down to 70 or 80, and that comes with scale. Really, we don't have this efficiencies in manufacturing and distribution that we would at scale, and whatever we're able to shave off in terms of product cost would naturally go to getting the consumer price low as low as possible. So building scale is a first step, and I think after that, building scale necessarily comes with cost reductions, but also you're benefiting a lot more people. So we're able to ask some things of the government that we're not able to right now, which is, plant-based milk, at least Goodmylk is taxed at 18% GST, right? And that's a lot. So our product is already 18% more costly when you compare it to dairy, even if both these products cost the same to manufacture. So, we could shave off 20% of our product cost just by getting taxation to be better with us. And, that's not even going into subsidies. So, I think it's not hard to be able to get to that point in terms of the theoretical aspect of it, but it's really doing the dirty work, building the initial scale, and then having a large enough volume of users who can demand a systemic change.
Yeah, one way of reducing costs, like you rightly said, is scale, right? And I'm sure you and Spurti are figuring a lot of those pieces, and you gave a great answer. Spurti, is there anything to add here from a R&D or innovation perspective in terms of selecting ingredients which are cost effective, shelf stability, stuff like that, which reduces your cost of distribution? Any answers around that which might help others kind of think better?
100%. So I think so cost is always in at the back of my head whenever I'm working on any product. I know what is the max that I want to price the product at, what's the least I can go. So I want to work within that range. So it does affect some of the raw materials that we can choose. And it's not just about which raw material, right? It also depends on whether that raw material is being processed in India or whether it's being processed in the Netherlands, for example. They all influence cost. So there are trade-offs that you will have to make. I think especially when we're a smaller company and our scale is much smaller, there are some trade-offs that we have to make. But I think as we grow, we can also make those swaps. And that's why we position ourselves as ingredient agnostic and technology agnostic, because it allows us that flexibility to make a change as and when required, as long as it's a better quality product to the consumer. And one thing that I do want to mention here is that Indians are very price sensitive. And I think, we're all Indian. We all know how much we like to pay for a lot of goods. But it's value for the product that matters the most. As long as consumers perceive value, they're happy with it. It's really fulfilling a need of theirs. I think they're okay with flexing on that cost a little bit. So I think it's important for you to make sure that you have a great product that's working just like you claim the product to work first. And then you can really think about pricing it more effectively, if that makes sense. And I think another point that I'd like to add here, Shardul, is actually, hoping to see more entrepreneurs do this, because as a community, if we come together, I'm a little bit of a socialist when it comes to this. I think there are more people in this space, the better it is for the category and the better it is for each of us. So I think it's very important that, there are more entrepreneurs or more companies who step up, start putting products out there, because there's a lot of collective wisdom and a lot of collective force we can use, like the taxes that Abhay mentioned. We can go have those discussions if there are multiple players in this space. As a sole player, we don't have as much leverage. So I highly encourage more people in this community to start, doing more work and putting some products out there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just about collective bargaining capacity. At the same time, there's a lot of exchange of information, and that's what we are always trying to get our community to do, like be more open and help initially a lot of people. And that's how you really build networks that, help going forward in launching products and iterations and successful product market launches, etc., etc. Varun, anything to add here specifically?
Yeah, so I'm cognizant where over time, but I had a couple of questions, Spurti, on that point. So we have a few different approaches. I mean, these are things that you might intuit. A few different approaches within our sector, right? So some people are heroing a certain ingredient or a certain product, which makes a lot of sense. So you might see as you mentioned rightly, the oat is a value chain that's seeing a ton of uptake right now. Oatly did really, really well with it, including in the US. People are clamoring to drink Oatly milk at Starbucks, etc. It's allowing even organizations like Starbucks to access consumers that were not consuming there prior, which is great. You also then have Chobani taking up oat, and it's really a hero value chain. That ingredient is a hero ingredient now. You also have kind of pea protein. I can easily see that happening for jackfruit as well. Indigenous crops here becoming hero products in the West. But then you also have Beyond Meat, where the former executive chairman, when I was on a panel with him at the Good Food Conference, which is GFI US's conference last year, he said on stage that they're willing to work on indigenous crops everywhere. So they're trying to build an adaptive platform that takes in different ingredients and works regardless of what the ingredient is, to make Beyond Burgers everywhere with different ingredients, but delivering the same quality to consumers. Can you talk about those two approaches and how you see them? Like, what are the challenges of each? Because you mentioned you're leaning more towards the right, where you're talking about adaptive, or always looking for further ingredients and being agnostic?
Yeah, I think part of it is also de-risking ourselves, right? I think if we're heavily dependent on one crop, especially, with a situation like this in COVID, where let's say if we were importing these ingredients and they were key to our product, we'd be in deep soup right now in terms of manufacturing and putting our products out there. But by actually allowing us to use multiple raw materials, I think it helps us de-risk quite a bit with supply issues, with price changes, etc. So I do see quite a few benefits there. I think when it comes to heroing an ingredient, if someone is choosing to do that, they need to go really, really deep. right? Depth is what you really have in your favor. So you better understand that ingredient like inside out. You need to know how to make the most of that ingredient. You need to be the expert in that space. So I would say, depending on the approach that you're going at, the depth that you get into also varies. That's one difference that I see. And I don't think there honestly is a right or wrong way about it. And I think there's a market for both. It really depends also on the branding and your story. I think Abhay, just in terms of building this company and actually building the brand around this company, has done a fantastic job, right? There's so much mission that's oozing out of the company. But there are other brands, like let's say one of my favorite is Cauliflower in the US, that started a long time ago. They're completely, they're focused on all the nut milks. They're extremely expensive, but they deliver great quality product. So if you are going that route, I think make sure that you're an expert in that space. You know how to make the most of that ingredient, and really, extrapolate as much of that functionality as you can. And you will have to have a very, very good brand story there.
I want to jump in here a little bit. I think one of the drawbacks of going the hero ingredient route is that tomorrow it's going to be another ingredient on the rise, and your ingredient is going to be on the decline. I think the more evergreen thing to do is to really focus on functionality, because the function of milk isn't going to change. People are still going to use it in coffee and tea. It may change from being plant-based to whatever, but the function of milk is going to remain. The ingredient may change, and while that in that macro perspective is also true, in that micro perspective, yesterday it was a few decades ago it was soy milk, then it was almond milk, and today it's oat milk. Tomorrow it could be something else, and you're going to end up launching products and then culling them, or end up having a bit of gunk in your portfolio from products that were yesterday's products. So might as well just focus on the real deal of and the dirty work of solving for function, really, which is hard, but it solves problems long term.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you did the former very badly, or if you did the former a little badly, or even if you didn't and just got unlucky, it could easily be that your hero ingredient is no longer a hero. But I mean, if you want to highlight the few value chains that have been dominant in food and agriculture over the last decades, soy, wheat, etc., I can easily see pea protein, that is yellow peas, getting to as cheap as soy protein over the next 5-10 years. And then you can bet that that's a very established, clear value chain that thousands of companies will start using pea protein over the next 10 years. So I think it really depends on what decisions you've made along the way. But yeah, thank you. Those are both really important perspectives. Shardul, I'm seeing some kind of object level questions where I think it would be super important to get Abhay and Spurti's experience here. Like, for example, how do you remove the flavor of peanut from peanut curd? I think these kinds of questions are super important for entrepreneurs. So do you want to take that, Abhay or Spurti? How do you remove the flavor, and how do you work with partners on things like this for ingredients that might do that, or your process to do those kinds of things? If you
sure. Yeah. So to whoever asked that question, if you have a solution, please reach out to me. I would be very, very interested in it. It's not an easy task at all, right? Because it takes a lot of science to do that. And for us, at the stage that we're at, we don't have a lot of resources and time and energy to actually work on the ingredients themselves. So if we have one of our ingredient suppliers, for example, to do the work and deflavor the protein in any format, the peanut, for example, and give it to us, that would be a huge benefit, right? So what I look at doing is more from a process standpoint, how can we optimize the flavor profile? From a fermentation standpoint, because we use peanuts in our peanut curd. So based on the cultures that we're using, based on the fermentation time that we use, you're going to get a varied flavor profile there. So that's the way we're trying to optimize at this point. And I think as and when more resources come our way, we will be able to get deeper and maybe use a little bit more science and technology in terms of just deflavoring the raw material itself. The soy industry has done a pretty good job at it. So I think it's just a matter of time that potentially these technologies can be applied to some other raw materials as well. Abhay, would you like to chime in there?
I mean, just maybe to agree with you, but yeah, I mean, I don't have much else to say.
Makes sense. Siddharth, any questions from a SciTech perspective for Spurti?
Yeah, so Spurti, like you spoke about a couple of things, like first of all, like having a lean R&D, but then at the same time, the like problems like these, right? Like, flavors from peanuts and more extensive research being required to kind of find solutions to that. So how do you think the university ecosystem plays into this? Because you have worked in the West, I've worked in US too, and a lot of times, when entrepreneurs in the initial rounds, when they don't have the capital to invest in this equipment or don't have a hypothesis or a proof of concept that a certain technology will work for something, usually they access university resources. So what sort of interventions do we need from a lot of top-notch universities in India to help entrepreneurs grow this ecosystem?
So, I mean, it's hard for me to give you exact solutions per se, but I think what's also important is our ability to pay for it, right? In the West, I think a lot of startups do have a decent amount of capital. So you're able to pass on that capital to the university that does some of the work for you. Especially even with the fact that we are pretty well funded at this point, I think I would really hesitate from putting a lot of my money in that direction until we get to a larger round. So you'd have to make a very, very cautious business decision based on how much money you have in the bank and what you really need to push that company to the next phase. And then it would make more sense for you to engage in these sort of partnerships. But I think what would really help is a lot of base level research that's happening, right? There's a lot of interesting research projects that students are taking up across the globe, for example, where always, even as a master's student, I spent a lot of time trying to find an interesting topic for me to actually work on, and it wasn't easy. So if students actually take some of these ideas, or if professors actually dig into this in terms of either setting it up like a master's thesis or a doctorate thesis in any form, I think it would really, it would be information and insights that they would gain, but also it would be a little bit more open access. So potentially we can use some of that as well. And those individuals, those students especially, they become feeders for this entire ecosystem. So they can take that knowledge and go work in a company and start doing some of these things. So I think that's what comes to mind, comes top of mind. But like you said, Siddharth, I think the West is set up very differently in terms of how the entire food and beverage ecosystem works. And it will be quite a while before we get there. I also would love something like a technical think tank to happen. Maybe it could be GFI led, where it's anyone who has technical queries coming together and really hashing some potential solutions out. And it doesn't have to be very IP sensitive, right? I think a lot of us face some pretty, similar issues, and we apply it in different ways in different products, but the issues remain the same. So we can always sort of brainstorm on those if a couple of different technical minds come together. Maybe that could be an interesting idea as well.
Yeah, thank you, Spurti. And, we are working towards having a scientific advisory committee for plant-based, fermentation-based, and cultivated products. So that should be out soon in a couple of months.
I should also state that we have a global research call for proposals every year, where this past year we gave out, GFI globally gave out 5 million plus in specific research grants that identified high value topics within the sector. And those were competitive. So those are more kind of university focused, Spurti, but I think it makes sense for us to consider kind of industry consortiums where people can come together to solve specific bottleneck type problems in the industry. Which is why I think, by the way, that this Wageningen model that's happening in the Netherlands right now with Wageningen University is good. And I think maybe we can try and replicate that in India at a think tank level if academia is too slow or whatever. I think that's a great suggestion.
Great. One more question I had for Abhay, and this is a combination of multiple questions, is around a founder who is fairly mission aligned, who kind of understands the importance of starting a company in plant-based dairy or even plant-based meat or egg space. How does he go on about raising money? Like, I know you spoke a little bit about this, but could you tell us from your own experiences of talking to multiple people and founders who have raised money in this area? You were in Boulder, you were at Stanford, you've gone across different ecosystem, hotspots over the world. You've learned from them. Do you have any specific 3 or 4 points that you want to share, including like what do you personally look at in an investor? What is the best approach? What are the minimum things you should definitely have in place, including like friends and family round, prototype, stuff like that on those notes? Can you comment a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Shardul. Really, I think having mission-aligned investors is your first step. There are plenty of people who are seeding companies, who are being angel investors in very early stage rounds. And I don't believe there's a shortage of capital out there for people who are looking to start up in India. And especially, it was maybe harder even 2 years ago, and it's definitely gotten easier over time. With our own round, we had a lot of options to choose from. So there's definitely a lot of resources out there. And another cool thing, I guess, is that companies like Y Combinator, Techstars, they're looking at, they recognize that alternative protein is something that's to be reckoned with. So they're opening up avenues for companies to get into their programs and get funded as well. So, but really having mission-aligned investors, I think, is the biggest step, because they're the ones who are most likely to see the vision. Because otherwise, you'll come across questions like, what is the TAM of your market? Do you have any specific data on the exact size of the market, or what is your exact consumer profile? Typically, at this point, because the data is so nascent, I know Good Food Institute is working on, India is working on that. That's awesome. I can't wait to read that report myself. But you don't have the answers to many of these questions, and it requires someone who is who sees the value of the mission of the company to be able to take a bet. Because eventually, what's going to grow the market is, and because you have the opportunity to do it at such an early stage, you're more likely to take up most of the pie, or a large amount of the pie at least. So they need to have that conviction that it's going to work, and not necessarily look at broad industry numbers, because a lot of the industry numbers too that I've seen on like reports online is that they don't all come from the right place. I know at one point an industry report listed Goodmylk as a key coconut milk manufacturer in India. That was absolutely false. And just because we had that product, we were listed as one of the top 3 companies that did that. And there just simply isn't enough data. You want people with conviction who will go the long run, and who is willing to stick with you when the numbers are really small. I think what we noticed is that quite a few investors tend to underestimate you when you're much smaller, and they tend to say, oh, I don't want to offer you really serious advice or give you the benefit of a doubt in really thinking about this and answering these questions for you, because the impact it's going to have on your own metrics are going to be negligible. But thankfully, we've had people that take every single minute problem that we send to them very seriously and give a genuine attempt at answering it. So and there's plenty of people who can help do that. And Varun has connected me to a few people from there. So I think GFI is another great resource to just for that.
Absolutely. And I think few points which you already had covered is having a prototype, having done a lot of consumer trials, getting that feedback in of your initial, customers and what they're saying about your product, what improvements that are needed on the product, the path to improving those from a SciTech perspective. So at the same time, finding the right co-man, you have to really figure out a lot of those pieces, at least in your head, and put them on paper, I guess, before approaching an investor, which is what a lot of entrepreneurs usually don't start with. It's usually just a deck on paper, which they send out to investors and hoping that they'll get some sort of traction going. But I think that doesn't really work. And that's why then a lot of people get disappointed with this approach. So we have a couple of good questions from a SciTech perspective, which are pending. Siddharth, do you want to cover those as well?
Yeah. So a quick question I had, Spurti and Abhay, both of you, was that milk is also one of the primary reasons people consume milk is for nutrition, right? It's amino acid profile, and its protein efficiency score is high. So does Goodmylk have any plans of even though it matters on a protein content level, but in terms of just the amino acid profiling? And what advice would you have to the community in large, like who are trying to even address the issues of nutrition through plant-based foods? A lot of people actually mix a lot of pulses and grains for that reason, so that they get a complete mix of amino acid profile. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just to add quickly, there's Spurti and Abhay. Like a lot of people were also talking about future plans of Goodmylk, right? And obviously some vision was shared by Abhay on where you see Goodmylk going in the next 4 or 5 years. And at the end, you're obviously competing with the conventional dairy products on cost, on nutrition, all of those factors. And that's the end goal, to make available Goodmylk products available right next to, conventional dairy. So reaching there in the next 5 years, obviously you must have some roadmap in your mind. Do you have any suggestions just to add to that point there as well?
Abhay, do you want to take on Shardul's question, and I'll get back to the protein part?
So I did have some thoughts on the protein part, which is that a lot of the companies that are the most popular ones in the plant-based milk space, like Oatly, or if you take a look at Beyond Meat or Impossible, they didn't really go after talking about their functional benefits in terms of the amino acid profiles or protein or whatever. They really went after function, and they did a great job with that. So while we have plans to get to that point, I don't think it's all that core to our portfolio, because but if you're drinking chai in the morning, it's not because you get calcium or because there are health benefits that are very obvious, but really it's because you like it, and because it's a habit, and because it's ingrained, and it's something you're conditioned to do, and that's the key problem that we want to solve before going after nutrition. I also think that nutrition is kind of a low-hanging fruit to solve in terms of just figuring out the right fortificants and solving it. Of course, Spurti is a better person to take that question forward. But fundamentally, I just while we're going to do it, I just don't see it being a key part of our offering, even with future products. I think we're going to always focus on functionality and making it as widely accessible as possible. Shardul, could you just repeat your question to me so I could get that back?
I think, yeah, that certainly answers some elements of that. And I think I'll just wait for Spurti to add into Siddharth's question as well, so I can tie it up.
Sure.
Yeah, Siddharth. So it's very, I'm very aligned with Abhay. We've spoken about this quite a bit. So we've really thought through how we want to develop our products. I'll get back to that point of depth, right? It's how deep do we really want to go? And what are our consumers looking for, especially when we look at folks transitioning to a plant-based diet and making these switch, they seem to be fairly health conscious, which also means that they're looking for different sources in order to fulfill their calcium needs. They don't want to have fortified food products even. They prefer having minimally fortified food products. So we're still in the process of really evaluating where it's required. You'll see in our milk that we really haven't gone down the fortification route for this reason, because our consumers currently, and even some of the future consumers we've spoken to, they really don't care about it. So going down to the level of actually, getting the same amino acid profile, I don't know if it's a direction that we'd want to take, at least in the near term. I think what we would be interested in as a company somewhere down the line, and Abhay and me have discussed this quite a bit, is actually lab-grown dairy, right? So that is what is the place that lab-grown dairy has in terms of mimicking the proteins or the fats, and especially in an Indian context, how feasible will it be in terms of cost? How easy will it be for us to manufacture it here? I think that's something that sounds a little bit more exciting to us than really breaking nutritional components down beyond just basic carbohydrates, fats, proteins, etc., especially from a health perspective.
Hey Shardul, so by the way, Abhay's answer tracks very strongly with what we're seeing in consumer research more broadly. So I think that's a great way to look at it, which is that nutrition tends to be discovery. The thing that matters overwhelmingly across segments is products that function or taste the same or better and cost the same or in the region or less, right? That's pretty much overwhelmingly what matters across different segments. Some people might go up to a grocery store aisle and see a product that's there that has on the label, this is plant-based, but still has more calcium. Or they might see that the Beyond Burger has 4 times as much iron as a regular beef burger, which it does. And they might make the switch at that exact moment to try it. But if you're talking about regularly buy, become a loyal customer, reliably, you can predict that that person's going to be converted to a certain extent to eating your product. It is just has to taste the same or better and cost the same or less. Price and taste are so overwhelmingly more important than these other considerations, which tend to be more of a discovery. So even when you're messaging, it's great to do it at the top level, talk to government about it, have it in some of your ads as this is very nutritious, etc. But in terms of buying behavior, those are the things that drive buying behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Price, taste, convenience. We keep repeating some of these things, and some of the regular attendees on the webinar kind of know that. But I think it's so overwhelmingly simple, price, taste, convenience, and how people really overlook all those 3 things while they are doing product development, looking for solutions, thinking about 5 years down the line. I think that's definitely all your perspectives add a lot of value to that. Siddharth, do you have any specific questions around the product development approach? Like one question which people usually have in the post-pandemic world is how do you, and again, like a lot of entrepreneurs in the context that they don't want to invest a lot of money, because obviously startups usually don't have a lot of cash when they're starting out, if they've just raised friends and family around. How do you do rapid R&D? And one of those answers would be just looking at literature review, etc. But could you add a little bit more perspective on how you go on about this approach while selecting ingredients or while thinking about different product iterations, etc.? Spurti?
I honestly, Shardul, I really don't know if there's a method to the madness. I think a lot of it, even I'm trying to break it down into specific, attributes, but just being very conscious of, and careful with how you design your experiments, right? Just a really good DOE where you know what your constants are, where you know what your variables are, I think can really help you answer a lot of different questions. So whatever it is that you're struggling with, like try to structure a really simple DOE around it, an experiment around it, and start knocking those things off instead of just randomly trying every recipe that's available on the internet. Because if I go today and I'm looking for a plant-based dairy milk recipe, there are thousands and thousands of blogs that are going to have different versions of it, and that's really not going to help you from a technical perspective to put a great quality product. So I think go back to your, if you're not a scientist, go back to your high school days, think about how you set up experiments, what is the question that you want to answer, be very clear about that, and design simple experiments around it. Because R&D, as much as product development especially, as much as you need expertise and knowledge, which honestly comes with also experience and exposure, you also need to it is iterative to put it in very simple terms. So I think that's the advice I would have. I don't know if that answers your question fully.
Yeah, to a certain extent. And I think there's no real clear answer, to be honest. And I think that's the point I really wanted to convey to people who usually ask, like, what's the best way of developing a product? There isn't one. Like, that's why it's difficult. And that's why startups who make a really functional product in this area have the biggest moat and, technological moat there. Varun, any further question here to add? I think we are kind of wrapping it up now. It's about 5:30 and, we've already exceeded 5-10 minutes over the time we had expected attendees to stay, and I'm really thankful for so many attendees to stay this long. So before we
no questions.
Any comments? No questions.
I mean, just a comment. I mean, like underlining the recipe thing you said just now, Shardul. I mean, Spurti and Abhay and their team are an example of what you need to actually do in order to. You have to have capacity in order to put out products, right? So like asking what is the formula or the recipe to develop a plant-based dairy solution is like saying, what is the recipe to develop deep learning inside my company? Well, the answer is hire talent that can do that and then figure it out. No one's going to teach you how to write algorithms, and no one's going to teach you how to formulate plant-based. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say. Thanks.
All right, great. Any parting thoughts, Abhay and Spurti, as we close down the session for today?
Just wanted to thank you, Shardul and Varun and Siddharth for the session, and it's awesome to see so many people being part of the community. I think we're gonna get further connected over the LinkedIn forum and other places. And just thanks for having us. We're really grateful for the awesome work that GFI India is doing.
Yeah, I'd like to second that as well. I think you guys have just been working tirelessly. I've seen like Varun, really build this ground up. It's not an easy task, and it's extremely impressive with what all of y'all have been able to accomplish in a very short period of time. And I think as someone who's who's on the outside and a part of a company, it's really, really beneficial to have this kind of an ecosystem. So a huge shout out to y'all. Thank you so much. And I think I'm really excited to see how this space evolves in India. I really want to see more entrepreneurs, out there developing more products and putting it out there, so we don't get complacent, right? Like we need to be on top of our toes at any given point. So hope to see a lot more, especially on the plant-based dairy space.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for your time. And just as a parting thought note on my front, I'll be circulating an email to all the members of GF Ideas community. We covered a little bit of this at the right at the very beginning of the webinar. I'll send those details of how to sign up for the GF Ideas India, the Smart Protein Innovation Community, and at the same time, also make sure that some of you who have attended today and who have signed up for the community get the recording of the webinar, the notes of the webinar, and also the presentation from Abhay and Spurti. They can be further contacted through our community database. They are there since right from the very beginning, and I'm sure they're open to constructive and synergy collaborations between all the members. Thank you. Have a great day ahead.